Jedediah Jed Johnson, a man whose weathered hands, calloused and strong, spoke of a lifetime spent coaxing life from the earth, owned a small but fiercely independent farm just outside the pristine, meticulously manicured, and some would say suffocating boundaries of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association, HOA. His farm, a vibrant patchwork of emerald green fields, rich brown soil, and the occasional burst of vibrant wildflowers, was a stark, almost defiant splash of natural beauty amidst the HOA's uniformly emerald lawns, their robotic sprinklers hissing in perfect synchronization. It was Jed's livelihood, his legacy, the culmination of generations of Johnsons who had tilled this land, nurturing it, respecting it, and drawing sustenance and solace from its bounty. A narrow wooden bridge, built by Jed himself decades ago, with the help of his late father, a man whose hands were as skilled as Jed's, spanned a shallow, meandering creek that snaked its way through both Jed's property and the manicured perfection of Willow Creek. The bridge, constructed from sturdy aged oak, was a simple structure, functional and unpretentious, a testament to Jed's practical nature and his deep connection to the land. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't designed to win architectural awards, but it was strong, reliable, and perfectly suited to its purpose. For years, it had served him well, a silent, steadfast partner in his daily routine, bearing the weight of his tractors, his harvests, and the occasional stray cow that wandered off in search of greener pastures. The Willow Creek HOA, however, viewed Jed's bridge with a mixture of disdain and thinly veiled hostility. Their pristine, carefully constructed image of suburban perfection, an image they guarded with the ferocity of a mother bear protecting her cubs, was, in their collective opinion, compromised by Jed's rustic crossing. They saw it as an eyesore, a blight on their carefully curated landscape, a symbol of the rural, unkempt world that they had worked so hard to exclude from their manicured utopia. Led by the imperious HOA president, Priscilla Hawthorne, a woman whose perfectly coiffed, platinum blonde hair and impeccably tailored designer suits seemed perpetually out of place amidst the natural, unadorned beauty of the area, the HOA decided that Jed's bridge, this symbol of his independence and his connection to a simpler, more authentic way of life, had to go. Priscilla, a former corporate lawyer with a taste for power and an intolerance for anything that deviated from her vision of aesthetic harmony, considered Jed's farm and particularly his bridge an affront to her sensibilities. She saw it as a relic of a bygone era, a stubborn reminder of the rural past that Willow Creek was so desperately trying to escape. The HOA declared the bridge unsafe, citing obscure building codes and long-forgotten regulations that, Jed suspected, had been conveniently unearthed specifically for this purpose. They claimed it was a liability, a danger to the community, despite the fact that no one had ever been injured on the bridge, and that Jed had meticulously maintained it over the years, replacing planks as needed and ensuring its structural integrity. Jed, a man of few words but unwavering resolve, a man whose quiet strength was rooted in the soil he tilled, protested the HOA's decision. He argued, calmly and rationally, that the bridge was sound, built with his own hands and regularly maintained. He presented them with independent engineering reports, prepared by a reputable structural engineer, reports that confirmed the bridge's structural integrity and its compliance with all relevant safety standards. He even offered to make any necessary repairs, to reinforce the structure, to do whatever it took to appease their concerns. But Priscilla and the HOA board, a collection of like-minded individuals who valued conformity over practicality, aesthetics over functionality, and control over community, were unmoved. They saw Jed's bridge not as a functional necessity, not as a vital link to his livelihood, but as a symbol of his independence, his refusal to conform to their narrow, restrictive vision of suburban utopia. They saw it as a challenge to their authority, a reminder that there was still a patch of land within their carefully defined boundaries that stubbornly resisted their efforts to homogenize everything. They wanted everything in Willow Creek to be the same, from the color of the houses to the height of the lawns, and Jed's bridge, with its rustic charm and its connection to a different way of life, was a jarring, unwelcome intrusion. Ignoring Jed's pleas, dismissing the independent engineering reports he had provided, and brushing aside any semblance of reason or compromise, they hired a demolition crew, a group of burly men in hard hats who arrived early one morning with heavy machinery, a crane, a bulldozer, and a crew of laborers armed with sledgehammers and chainsaws. Jed watched, his jaw tight, his eyes narrowed as they tore down the bridge, the splintering wood echoing the shattering of his trust in the community he thought he was a part of. The sound of the crashing timbers was like a gunshot, the sharp, sudden crack that signaled the beginning of a war. He watched as the bridge, a symbol of his connection to his land, his heritage, his very identity, was reduced to rubble, the pieces hauled away like so much garbage. The destruction of the bridge was not just the removal of a physical structure. It was the symbolic severing of a connection, the spark that ignited a fire within Jed, a fire of righteous anger and unwavering determination. It was the moment he realized that the Willow Creek HOA, with their petty rules and their insatiable desire for control, had crossed a line. They had not just torn down a bridge, they had torn down the fragile peace that had existed between Jed and his suburban neighbors. They had underestimated Jed, mistaking his quiet demeanor for weakness, his respect for the land for subservience. They had pushed him too far. Jed, a quiet man pushed to his limit, a man who had always preferred the company of his animals and the solitude of his fields, vowed to rebuild, not just his bridge, but his relationship with his land, and to expose the HOA's petty tyranny, their hypocrisy, and their blatant disregard for the rights of others for what it was. He knew it wouldn't be easy. He was one man against a powerful organization, an organization with deep pockets and a penchant for litigation. But Jed was a farmer, and farmers knew how to weather storms. He would use their own rules against them, expose their weaknesses, and reclaim his bridge and, more importantly, his peace, his independence, and his connection to the land that had been in his family for generations. The demolition of the bridge marked the end of peaceful coexistence and the beginning of a long and bitter battle. A battle that would pit Jed, the quiet farmer, against the Willow Creek HOA, the self-proclaimed guardians of suburban perfection. The demolition of his bridge was a declaration of war, and Jedediah Johnson, though a man of peace, was not one to back down from a fight, especially when it concerned his land, his livelihood, and his principles. The HOA had mistaken his quiet demeanor for weakness, his patience for acquiescence. They were about to learn a valuable lesson: never underestimate a farmer. Jed, fueled by a righteous anger that simmered beneath his calm exterior, began to plan his counteroffensive. He knew he couldn't fight the HOA on their terms, not with their lawyers and their deep pockets. He needed to be smarter, more strategic. He needed to find their weaknesses, exploit their vulnerabilities, and turn their own weapons against them. His first step was information. He began to dig, metaphorically at first and then literally. He spent hours at the county courthouse, poring over public records, meticulously examining HOA documents, financial statements, meeting minutes, anything he could get his hands on. He was looking for inconsistencies, irregularities, anything that could give him an edge. He discovered that Priscilla Hawthorne, the HOA president, wasn't just a stickler for rules, she was a master of bending them to her own advantage. He found records of questionable expenses, inflated contracts awarded to her friends and family, and even whispers of backroom deals involving zoning variances and property development. The more he dug, the more dirt he unearthed. It was like peeling back the layers of an onion, each layer revealing a deeper level of corruption and self-dealing. He also started talking to people, the residents of Willow Creek, the very people Priscilla and the HOA board were supposed to represent. He went door to door, not with petitions or angry accusations, but with a quiet, genuine interest in their lives and their concerns. He listened to their stories, their frustrations, their complaints about the HOA's heavy-handed tactics and their disregard for the residents' needs. He discovered that many people were unhappy with the way the HOA was being run, but they were afraid to speak out, afraid of the repercussions. They had seen what happened to those who dared to challenge Priscilla and her board. Jed, with his quiet, unassuming manner, gained their trust. He didn't promise them anything he couldn't deliver, he simply listened, offered a sympathetic ear, and planted the seeds of doubt about the HOA's leadership. He learned about other instances of the HOA overstepping its bounds, imposing fines for minor infractions, bullying homeowners into compliance, and using their power to enrich themselves at the expense of the community. One resident, a retired school teacher named Martha Jenkins, told him about how the HOA had refused to allow her to build a small shed in her backyard, citing arcane zoning regulations, even though her neighbors had no objections. Another resident, a young couple named David and Sarah Miller, shared their story of how they had been threatened with foreclosure for falling behind on their HOA dues, even though they had been struggling to make ends meet after David lost his job. These stories, these individual acts of injustice, fueled Jed's determination. He realized that his fight wasn't just about his bridge, it was about the rights of every homeowner in Willow Creek, about the very principles of fairness and justice. As he gathered more information, Jed began to see a pattern. The HOA wasn't just a group of well-meaning neighbors trying to maintain property values, it was a tightly controlled organization, run by a select few who were using their positions to enrich themselves and consolidate their power. Priscilla Hawthorne, he realized, was the key. She was the puppet master, pulling the strings, manipulating the board, and silencing dissent. Jed knew that if he wanted to take down the HOA, he had to take down Priscilla first. He needed to expose her corruption, her hypocrisy, and her abuse of power. He needed to show the residents of Willow Creek the truth about their HOA president. He started to meticulously document everything he had learned, every questionable expense, every backroom deal, every instance of bullying and intimidation. He compiled his findings into a comprehensive dossier, a detailed account of the HOA's misdeeds. He knew he had to be careful. He couldn't just go public with his accusations without proof. He needed to have solid evidence, irrefutable documentation to back up his claims. He knew that Priscilla and the HOA would fight back, they would try to discredit him, to silence him, to bury him in legal fees. But Jed was prepared. He had anticipated their tactics. He had consulted with a lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense attorney named Rebecca Chen, who specialized in property law and had a reputation for taking on powerful opponents. Rebecca had advised him to be patient, to be thorough, to build a strong case before going public. She had warned him that the HOA would likely try to intimidate him, to threaten him, to make his life miserable. But Jed was undeterred. He had faced down droughts, floods, and pest infestations. He had weathered storms that had destroyed other farms. He wasn't going to be intimidated by a group of power-hungry suburbanites. He was a farmer and he knew how to fight for what was right. He was going to rebuild his bridge and he was going to tear apart the HOA's empire, brick by manicured brick. Jedediah Johnson, armed with his meticulously compiled dossier of the Willow Creek HOA's misdeeds, knew the time had come to bring his findings to light. He understood that a quiet, behind-the-scenes campaign wouldn't be enough. He needed to make a splash, to grab the attention of the Willow Creek residents and, more importantly, the local media. He knew Priscilla Hawthorne and the HOA board wouldn't go down without a fight, so he needed to be prepared for their counterattacks, their attempts to discredit him, to paint him as a disgruntled farmer with a personal vendetta. He needed to control the narrative, to present his evidence in a clear, compelling way that would leave no room for doubt. He decided to hold a town hall meeting, not at the HOA clubhouse where Priscilla and her cronies held sway, but at the local community center, a neutral ground where everyone would feel welcome. He sent out flyers, posted notices on community bulletin boards, and even took out a small ad in the local newspaper, inviting all Willow Creek residents to attend a meeting to discuss concerns about the HOA's management and transparency. He knew the meeting would be a gamble. He wasn't sure how many people would show up, how many would be willing to publicly challenge the HOA. But he had to try. He had to give the residents of Willow Creek a voice, a chance to express their frustrations and their concerns. The night of the meeting arrived and Jed, dressed in his usual work clothes, a simple flannel shirt and a pair of worn jeans, stood nervously at the front of the community center, waiting to see who would show up. To his surprise, the room began to fill up. Residents of Willow Creek, some he knew, some he didn't, started trickling in, their faces a mixture of curiosity, apprehension, and a glimmer of hope. Martha Jenkins, the retired school teacher, was there, along with David and Sarah Miller, the young couple who had been threatened with foreclosure. Other residents, people Jed had never met before, also came, drawn by the whispers and rumors that had been circulating about the HOA's questionable activities. As the room filled to capacity, Jed took a deep breath and began. He didn't start with accusations or angry denunciations. He started by telling his story, the story of his bridge, its destruction, and the HOA's justifications. He spoke calmly, rationally, laying out the facts, presenting the engineering reports, and explaining how the HOA had ignored his pleas and dismissed his evidence. Then he moved on to the other issues he had uncovered, the questionable expenses, the inflated contracts, the zoning variances, the stories of bullying and intimidation. He presented his evidence not in a dry, legalistic way, but in a way that resonated with the audience, connecting with their own experiences and frustrations. He told Martha Jenkins' story, David and Sarah Miller's story, and the stories of other residents who had been wronged by the HOA. He showed them the documents, the financial statements, the meeting minutes, the evidence that proved Priscilla and the HOA board had been abusing their power. As Jed spoke, the mood in the room began to shift. The initial apprehension gave way to anger, then to a sense of shared outrage. People started to speak up, sharing their own stories, their own experiences with the HOA's heavy-handed tactics. Martha Jenkins talked about the shed she wasn't allowed to build. David Miller talked about the foreclosure threat. Other residents talked about fines they had been unfairly assessed, about restrictions that made no sense, about the HOA's refusal to listen to their concerns. The room became a cauldron of simmering resentment, a collective voice rising up to challenge the HOA's authority. Then Jed turned his attention to Priscilla Hawthorne. He didn't resort to personal attacks or name-calling. He simply presented the facts, the evidence of her questionable dealings, her conflicts of interest, her manipulation of the HOA board. He showed them how she had used her position to enrich herself and her friends, how she had silenced dissent, how she had created a climate of fear and intimidation. He showed them the truth about Priscilla Hawthorne, the truth that had been hidden behind her carefully constructed facade of respectability. The town hall meeting was a turning point. It was the moment the residents of Willow Creek realized they weren't alone in their frustrations, that they had a common enemy in Priscilla Hawthorne and the HOA board. It was the moment they found their voice, their courage to challenge the status quo. The local newspaper, which had sent a reporter to cover the meeting, ran a front-page story the next day, detailing the accusations against the HOA and Priscilla Hawthorne. The story sparked a public outcry, with residents demanding an investigation into the HOA's finances and operations. The county authorities, pressured by the public and the media, launched an audit of the HOA's books. The audit revealed even more irregularities, more instances of mismanagement and self-dealing. Priscilla Hawthorne's carefully constructed empire began to crumble. Facing mounting pressure from the residents, the media, and the authorities, Priscilla and several members of the HOA board resigned in disgrace. The remaining board members, realizing the gravity of the situation, voted to reinstate Jed's bridge, acknowledging their mistake and apologizing for the harm they had caused. Jed's gamble had paid off. He had taken on the HOA and won. He had exposed their corruption, their hypocrisy, and their abuse of power. He had given the residents of Willow Creek their voice back. He had rebuilt his bridge, not just the physical structure but also the bridge between himself and his community. The town hall meeting marked the beginning of the end for the Willow Creek HOA as it had been. It was a victory for Jed, but more importantly, it was a victory for the residents of Willow Creek, a victory for fairness, transparency, and the right of every homeowner to have a say in their community. The resignation of Priscilla Hawthorne and the exposure of the HOA's corrupt practices sent shockwaves through Willow Creek. The meticulously crafted facade of suburban perfection had been shattered, revealing the rot that had festered beneath the surface. The residents, initially hesitant to challenge the established order, now felt empowered, emboldened by Jedediah Johnson's courage and the undeniable evidence of the HOA's misdeeds. The county's audit, which uncovered even more financial irregularities and questionable transactions, further fueled their anger and solidified their resolve to rebuild their community, not just physically but also morally. The newly elected HOA board, composed of residents who had been vocal about their concerns and committed to transparency and accountability, faced a daunting task. They had to restore trust, rebuild relationships, and create a new vision for Willow Creek, one that was based on fairness, respect, and community involvement. They reached out to Jed, acknowledging the injustice he had suffered and seeking his input on how to move forward. Jed, ever the pragmatist, offered his assistance, not out of a desire for revenge or recognition, but out of a genuine concern for the well-being of his community. He understood that the healing process would take time, that the divisions created by the previous HOA regime wouldn't disappear overnight. But he was willing to work with the new board, to share his knowledge and experience, and to help rebuild the bridges that had been broken. The first order of business was Jed's bridge. The new HOA board, recognizing the symbolic importance of its reconstruction, organized a community bridge-raising ceremony. Residents, young and old, came out to participate, to show their support for Jed and their commitment to a new beginning. They brought food, they brought tools, they brought their shared sense of community. Jed, with the help of his neighbors, rebuilt the bridge plank by plank, just as he had done decades ago with his father. But this time it wasn't just his bridge, it was the community's bridge, a symbol of their unity, their resilience, and their determination to build a better future. As the last plank was nailed into place, a cheer went up from the crowd, a cheer that echoed across the creek and into the surrounding fields, a cheer that signified not just the completion of the bridge, but the completion of a chapter, the closing of a painful chapter in Willow Creek's history. The rebuilding of the bridge was just the beginning. The new HOA board, with Jed's guidance, implemented a series of reforms aimed at increasing transparency and accountability. They opened up the HOA meetings to all residents, they published detailed financial reports online, and they established a system for residents to voice their concerns and participate in decision-making. They also revised the HOA bylaws, eliminating the restrictive and often arbitrary rules that had been used to bully and intimidate homeowners. They focused on creating a sense of community, organizing social events, supporting local businesses, and fostering a spirit of cooperation and mutual respect. Slowly but surely Willow Creek began to heal. The divisions that had been created by the previous HOA regime began to fade, replaced by a sense of shared purpose and a renewed commitment to community. Residents who had been afraid to speak out now felt comfortable expressing their opinions, participating in discussions, and contributing to the betterment of their community. The atmosphere in Willow Creek changed dramatically. The tension and distrust that had permeated the community were replaced by a sense of camaraderie and cooperation. People started to talk to each other again, to help each other out, to build friendships that had been strained or broken by the previous HOA's divisive tactics. Jedediah Johnson, the quiet farmer who had challenged the powerful HOA and won, became a local hero. He didn't seek the recognition or the praise. He simply continued to tend to his farm, to nurture his land, and to be a good neighbor. He had shown the residents of Willow Creek the power of one person to make a difference, the importance of standing up for what is right, and the strength that comes from community. He had not only rebuilt his bridge, but he had also rebuilt the trust and the spirit of community that had been lost. Willow Creek was no longer a place of rigid conformity and petty rules. It was a place where people respected each other's differences, where they valued community involvement, and where they worked together to create a better future. The story of Jedediah Johnson and the Willow Creek HOA became a local legend, a reminder that even the most powerful institutions can be challenged by the courage and determination of ordinary people. And it all started with a bridge, a symbol of connection, a symbol of resilience, and a symbol of the enduring power of community. The bridge stood tall, strong, and sturdy, a testament to Jed's unwavering spirit and a reminder of the day Willow Creek rediscovered the true meaning of community. The end. And that's the story of Jedediah Johnson and the Willow Creek HOA. A story of resilience, community, and the power of one person to make a difference. If you enjoyed this tale of David versus Goliath, of farmer versus HOA, and want to hear more stories like this, stories that celebrate the human spirit and the triumph of good over adversity, then be sure to subscribe to our channel. Hit that subscribe button and the notification bell so you don't miss out on future stories filled with intrigue, compelling twists, and the kind of satisfying endings that make you believe in the power of hope. We've got plenty more stories to tell, and we'd love for you to join us on this journey. Subscribe now and become a part of our community.